You are what you eat is one of the most profound statements that you will hear. Unfortunately, few of us realize how important nutrition is to our health. To give yourself the best chance of success with IVF, you should pay attention to what you eat and drink. Food is extremely powerful, and eating the diet we evolved to eat can make a significant difference to your overall health as well as your chances of IVF success. A proper balanced diet can have potent drug-like effects. In fact, if a pharmaceutical company were to produce a pill that had equivalent effects to a good diet, it would transform the world's health. When my wife and I asked our fertility doctors for dietary advice, they simply told us to eat a healthy diet. Okay, great, but what is a healthy diet? Are there foods that can specifically help or harm fertility? As we researched the subject, we found that nutrition is not only important, it is critical to success. Let's first take a look at the problems with typical modern diets. We'll then go on to look at the diet linked to significant increases in IVF success rates and how we can improve it even further. Humans evolved over millions of years eating a particular diet. About 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution began, and the human diet changed radically. From an evolutionary perspective, 10,000 years is the blink of an eye, and certainly not sufficient time to enable us to evolve to cope with a drastically changed diet. Genetically speaking, we are still cavemen. Prior to the agricultural revolution, we were hunter-gatherers, eating foods that could be hunted or fished, meat, fish, shellfish, etc., and foods that could be gathered, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, eggs, mushrooms, herbs, spices, etc. These were of course all wild and organic, and as a result full of nutrients and free from chemicals. During the agricultural revolution, humans began to rear animals for meat, and to grow various crops, including grains. This is where the problems began. Things got worse during the Industrial Revolution when foods were processed and refined, and the use of unnatural fertilizers and pesticides became prevalent. In the Western world, today's diet is typically very different from the diet of our ancestors. In the US, the acronym SAD has been coined. It stands for Standard American Diet. It is not just a US issue, however. The diets in most Western countries have changed dramatically, even over the last 200 years. Whereas food used to be fresh and grown locally, these days much of the food we eat is processed, contains excessive amounts of sugar, together with toxic fats and chemical additives. Many experts believe that the consequence of this is inflammation that slowly damages our bodies and causes a host of chronic diseases. Let's take a look at some of the big offenders. Sugar. Refined sugar is bad for you. I'm not talking about the natural sugars that are found in fruit and vegetables. I'm talking about the stuff that has been heavily processed. The problems stem from the fact that our bodies are simply not designed to handle large amounts of sugar. We cannot deal with it efficiently as we have not evolved to do so. Over the years, the amount of sugar in our diets has increased dramatically. One study, for example, showed that in 1700, the average sugar consumption per year was 4 pounds, but by 2007, had reached over 147 pounds per year. So, what is the consequence of this massive increase? Well, it's not great for our teeth, but that is a minor issue in the scheme of things. Excessive sugar intake has been shown to cause liver damage, diabetes, obesity, cancer, and heart disease. To make matters even worse, it's highly addictive. It is not just sucrose, the most common form of sugar, that is the problem. Sugar comes in many forms and is often hidden in products. Various names are used to describe it, including agave syrup, brown rice syrup, corn syrup, fructose, dehydrated cane juice, dextrin, dextrose, fruit juice concentrate, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, inverted sugar, isoglucose, levolose, malt syrup, maltodextrin, maltose, maple syrup, and palm sugar. We will see later the impact sugar intake can have on fertility and IVF. Processed foods. Virtually all food is processed in some way before consumption. What I'm talking about here is overly processed foods that have been highly refined, with the result that their intrinsic nutritional value has been removed and/or chemicals, preservatives, flavorings, colorings, etc., have been added. Our brains love processed foods. We evolved from times when food could be scarce, and so calorie-dense foods were a great aid to survival. Highly processed foods tend to be packed with fat and refined carbs, which means they are very calorie-dense. But our brains have not evolved to recognize that we are no longer in a struggle for survival, and so it still craves them. This often leads to overconsumption and can lead to addiction. Our love of processed foods is problematic because they are often high in refined carbohydrates, low in nutrients, high in calories, low in fiber, high in trans fats, and packed with chemicals. Each of these can cause health issues. There are not that many studies on the health effects of processed foods as a category because the constituents differ substantially. Instead, researchers have looked into the effect of specific ingredients. In the studies that have been done, processed foods have been linked with an increased risk of cancer, asthma, eczema, and severe allergic reactions. Of course, as those processed foods often contain things like sugar and trans fats, which we'll talk about later, the health problems associated with those ingredients are also applicable. Gluten is found in many grains, including wheat, barley, rye, semolina, and couscous, but not in buckwheat, quinoa, rice, corn, or millet, and contains chemicals called lectins, which are the grain's self-defensive mechanism against being eaten. The problem with gluten is that we have not evolved with the stomach enzymes necessary to digest it properly. When we eat it, inflammatory particles can be released into our bloodstream and transported around the body. The consequence can then be gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, an extreme reaction to gluten, which have in turn been linked with a number of health issues including irritable bowel syndrome, cancer, fatigue, schizophrenia, depression, and dementia. Gluten consumption has also been linked with increased risk of early death. For example, a study of nearly 30,000 patients over 40 years looked at death rates of people with celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. The researchers found a 39% increased risk of early death in patients with celiac disease, a 72% increased risk in those with gut inflammation related to gluten, and a 35% increased risk in those with gluten sensitivity but no celiac disease. It is probably not a surprise, given the sections on sugar and processed food, that many people consume too many calories. These are not the only causes, however. Increased food availability and more aggressive marketing have also been blamed. Various studies have estimated how much calorie intake has increased over the years, with one study suggesting that adults eat an additional 500 calories per day. It is interesting to note that levels of obesity have increased alongside the caloric increase. We will look in detail at the impact of body weight on IVF success in the body weight section. Let's start here by getting one thing straight. Wild and organic meat reared in the way nature intended and eaten in moderation are not the issues here. This issue is meat from animals that have been raised in artificial conditions, fed foods they do not naturally eat, given drugs to keep them free of disease, and, in some countries, given hormones to speed up growth. Take beef as an example. Nature intended for cattle to roam pastures and graze on grass. They are not intended to be intensively reared, kept in confined cowsheds, be fed a grain-based diet and receive antibiotics, growth hormones, and other drugs. Cattle reared in this way produces very different meat to cattle raised naturally. The difference is not a good one. Unfortunately, the vast majority of beef is now produced in this way. In the US, it is known as feedlot. The saying, "you are what you eat," is again very relevant here. By eating meat raised in an unnatural way, we ourselves are eating food that we are not, by evolution, designed to eat. This can lead to health problems. You have no doubt seen news headlines that report on studies that proclaim red meat causes various illnesses. One of the things that these studies do not do is differentiate between naturally reared meat and intensively reared meat. Naturally reared meat is a very different beast, pun intended. However, the results of these studies are still valid because the vast majority of red meat consumed is intensively reared. On the other hand, using beef again as the example, naturally raised, grass-fed beef has been shown to have higher levels of healthy omega-3 fats, 2 to 5 times higher depending on the breed, than grain-fed beef, and consequently a more healthy ratio of omega-6 fat to omega-3 fat, 1.53 to 1 in grass-fed beef versus 7.65 to 1 in grain-fed beef. We will look at the importance of this ratio when we consider refined oils. 2 to 3 times more conjugated linoleic acid, usually abbreviated to CLA, than grain-fed beef, a potent antioxidant shown to protect against various conditions, including cancer. Carotenoid, a group of antioxidants which include beta-carotene, levels are much higher than grain-fed beef. More of the antioxidants, vitamin E, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. Higher levels of essential minerals, zinc, iron, phosphorus, sodium, and potassium. Rather than causing health issues, grass-fed beef is good for us. While the example above refers specifically to beef, the position is similar with other naturally reared meats. Refined oils. These are oils that have been produced using heavy chemical processes, and they are frequently used in food. The content of refined oils is unlike anything humans have been exposed to throughout evolution. This is not a compliment to human ingenuity, as they can be extremely damaging to our health. The first problem is trans fats. I'm not going to cover these here except to say that they are so damaging to our health and fertility that I have included them in the toxins section. But that's not the only problem with refined oils. These days, most people will have heard of omega-3 fats and the health benefits of consuming them. Fewer people will have heard of omega-6 fats. In themselves, there is nothing wrong with omega-6 fats. They are known as an essential fat, meaning that our body cannot produce them from other sources, so we have to get them from our diet. The issues arise when the balance between omega-6 and omega-3 intake becomes out of kilter. As humans evolved, we typically consumed a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. Today, the ratio in Western diets is around 16-to-1. The position is even more skewed than the ratio suggests because these fats compete with each other. So the more omega-6s we consume, the more omega-3s we need. So what's the problem? When the ratio is out of kilter, omega-6s cause inflammation, and inflammation, as we have seen, is linked to numerous chronic diseases. Excessive omega-6 intake, for example, has been linked with heart disease, asthma, cancer, and depression. Are you getting the idea that the modern Western diet is not ideal? The question now, of course, is what sort of diet should we follow? There is a diet that not only avoids the issues created by the modern Western diet, it actually has been linked with dramatic improvements in IVF success rates. It is also delicious. The Mediterranean diet, with tweaks. You may have heard about the Mediterranean diet and its health benefits. If you haven't, this diet is, unsurprisingly, the typical diet of people living along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. There are subtle variations in the diet between countries, but it usually comprises some or all of the following: fresh, local, and seasonal fruit, vegetables, and herbs, wild fish, and shellfish, lean, naturally raised meat, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, whole grains, extra virgin olive oil. And importantly, it is low in highly processed foods. In many ways, grains aside, this diet closely resembles the diet we have evolved to eat, and people that follow it have been shown to have lower rates of heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, diabetes, asthma, and strokes. People following a Mediterranean diet also have much lower body mass indexes. We consider the importance of BMI to IVF success in the body weight section. In fact, it has been shown that people lose weight when eating a Mediterranean diet, even if they are not trying. Does this list of illnesses sound familiar? It should, as it is similar to the list of illnesses we looked at in relation to inflammation and the typical Western diet. Not only is the Mediterranean diet low in many of the causes of inflammation found in the modern Western diet, it is abundant in nutrients that actively reduce inflammation, such as antioxidants and healthy fats. The Mediterranean diet is something that has existed for as long as humans have inhabited the region, and has not changed much from the caveman days. People living around the Mediterranean Sea simply harvested and consumed what was available, and it just so happened that what was available was extremely healthy. Heavily processed foods have not infiltrated the diets of Mediterranean people to anywhere near the extent of much of the Western world. But things like pasta, bread, and other baked products are consumed. These would not form part of the ideal IVF diet, as they are made from grains which contain gluten and refined carbs, which disrupt our blood sugar levels. It is true that the Mediterranean diet often comprises things made from whole grains, which are slightly better, rather than highly refined grains. But even then, whole grains are not ideal. So, if we were to remove grains from the diet, where does that leave us? It actually moves us toward another diet called the paleo, short for Paleolithic or caveman diet. This diet aims to replicate the diets of hunter-gatherers, thereby avoiding things like processed food. The paleo diet has not been studied to the same extent as the Mediterranean diet, and for IVF success, the Mediterranean diet is the one to go for. But the studies that have been done show it improves diabetes indicators, blood pressure, indicators of heart disease, and cholesterol levels. Like the Mediterranean diet, it also results in weight loss even where people are not trying to lose weight. How can it help? So, the Mediterranean diet is good for our health. Does it also increase our chances of success with IVF? Let's look at the evidence. In a Dutch study involving 161 couples undergoing IVF, researchers looked at the diets of each of the couples and found that those couples following a Mediterranean diet were 40% more likely to achieve pregnancy than those who did not. An interesting footnote is that the increased success rates were only evident where both the male and female partner followed the diet. Another study, this time in Spain, looked at the diets of 2,154 women, some of whom had problems getting pregnant. The researchers divided the women into two groups. One group that followed a Mediterranean diet, and the other group followed a typical modern Western diet. The Mediterranean diet group were 46% less likely to have problems getting pregnant than the Western diet group. A study of 147 women carried out at Harvard looked specifically at intake levels of different types of fat. They found that the women who consumed the highest levels of the type of fats typically found in Mediterranean diets, monosaturated fats, from things like extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds, and avocados, were 3.4 times more likely to have a live birth following embryo transfer. Yet another study, this time conducted at the University of Athens, categorized women undergoing IVF based on how closely they followed a Mediterranean diet. Those women who followed it most closely had pregnancy rates of 50%, compared to only 29% in those who did not follow it. They also had live birth rates of 48.8% compared to only 26.6%. Finally, it is not only women who can benefit from this diet. A study in 2016, again by the University of Athens, categorized men based on how closely they followed a Mediterranean diet. The men who followed it most closely had much better sperm quality using every measure than those that did not follow it. The researchers calculated the proportion of participants that met the World Health Organization's expected levels found that 47.4% of men following a Mediterranean diet met these levels, compared to only 16.7% of men who didn't follow it. A similar picture emerged with sperm counts, 55.3% compared to 22.7%. Sperm motility, 65.8% compared to 31.8%. And sperm morphology, 50% compared to 28.8%. What can we do? In this section, I've tried to summarize some complex issues in an easily digestible form. Pun again. It may seem like a minefield, and it can be, but with a few simple guidelines, we can cut through the complexity. The basis of the ideal IVF diet is, unsurprisingly, the Mediterranean diet. So, to give yourself the best chance, ensure that the vast majority of the food you eat comes from the following groups: fresh, local, and seasonal fruit, vegetables, and herbs, wild fish, and shellfish, lean, naturally raised meat, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil. Of course, you don't have to eat only Mediterranean dishes, although there are some fantastic recipes, but try to cook primarily with these ingredients. While the Mediterranean diet is a great starting point, there are a number of tweaks that we can make to improve it and further increase our chances of IVF success. You will recognize a number of the tweaks as reactions to the issues created by the modern Western diet. We have touched on these already, but will now look specifically at their impact on IVF success. From now on, we'll refer to the tweaked diet as the MDWT, Mediterranean Diet with Tweaks. Tweak 1. Avoid gluten. Gluten issues are difficult to test for, so while 0.5 to 1% of the population have been found to have celiac disease, it is estimated that 29% of us experience issues with gluten. One study suggests that the numbers are actually increasing rapidly. Comparing blood tests taken from a group of people between 1948 and 1954 and tests from people 50 years later, researchers found a 400% increase in the incidence of celiac disease. In addition to the links to health issues generally, gluten also seems to affect fertility. One study showed that women with unexplained infertility are 2.5 to 3.5 times more likely to have celiac disease than women who are not infertile. Other studies have linked gluten with menstruation issues and increased rates of miscarriage and stillbirths. The traditional Mediterranean diet includes pasta, bread, and other baked goods. These are all made from grains, and grains, as we have seen, contain gluten. As a result, these and other foods made from grains are best avoided. Tweak 2. Cut sugar and refined carbohydrates. We saw earlier how the increase in sugar consumption has impacted health in general, and the impact is not pretty. Refined carbs are not much better. Refined carbs include bread, pasta, rice, flour, and foods containing flour, white potatoes, candy, sweets, and processed foods containing sugar. Given the cascade of health issues overconsumption of sugar and refined carbs creates, it is not a wild guess to think that it may also impact our fertility. Let's have a look. A Danish study looked at certain blood sugar markers in couples trying to conceive, and found that women with the highest levels of these markers were only half as likely to become pregnant as women with lower levels. A Japanese study took 157 women undergoing either IVF or ICSI, and again, examined their blood sugar markers. Women with low blood sugar markers produced more eggs, 14.6 compared to 8.4, which led to a higher number of embryos, 9 compared to 4.7, and higher pregnancy rates, 23% compared to 3.4%. A 2009 study at Harvard looked at the effect sugar and refined carbs has on ovulatory infertility, an inability to produce eggs. It took 438 women and examined the glycemic load of carbohydrates in their diets. Glycemic load is a measure of how foods raise blood sugar. Refined carbs have a high glycemic load. The researchers found that those women eating foods with the highest glycemic load were 92% more likely to suffer ovulatory infertility compared to those who ate foods with the lowest glycemic load. Eating refined carbohydrates causes spikes in our blood sugar levels, which has similar, albeit lesser, effects to diabetes, and has been shown that diabetics, both men and women, suffer from increased fertility issues. Coupled with this is the fact that when diabetic drugs designed to control blood sugar levels are given to women, their chances of achieving ongoing pregnancy double. To top this all off, a Chinese study has shown that another issue linked to high sugar intake, insulin resistance, can have a significant impact on our risk of miscarriage. The study took women undergoing IVF or ICSI and found that the women with insulin resistance miscarried in 47.8% of cases, whereas women without insulin resistance miscarried in only 9.5% of cases. How can you ensure that you avoid sugar and refined carbs? By eating foods that have low, 10 or less, or moderate, 11 to 19 glycemic loads, and avoiding anything with a high, 20 or more, glycemic load. There are numerous websites that categorize foods by their glycemic load, and they are a useful reference point. We used a brilliant database compiled by the University of Sydney, Australia. Tweak 3. Avoid highly processed foods. To get the most from a Mediterranean diet, we should minimize the amount of highly processed foods. There are a number of things that we can do to avoid them. Look at food labels. Generally, the longer the list of ingredients, the more processed the food is likely to be. Be wary of common highly processed foods, such as breakfast cereals, bread and baked goods, pastry-based products, sandwiches, biscuits, cookies, cereal bars, confectionery, crisps, ready-made meals, margarine, takeaways, fast food, ice cream, and ready-made sauces. Buy and cook with real ingredients. Choose locally grown and seasonal produce where possible. Avoid low-fat, fat-free products. To replace the fat, these products are often loaded with unhealthy ingredients. In fact, low-fat, fat-free dairy products have actually been associated with fertility issues. Avoid foods with artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives. Tweak 4. Eat between 25% and 35% of your calories from protein. The impact of protein consumption on IVF success was shown in a 2013 study. The researchers looked at the diets of 120 patients undergoing IVF and divided them into categories based on their protein intake. Those who got 25% or more of their calories from protein, and those who got less than 25% of their calories from protein. There was a significant difference in success rates between the two groups. In the high-protein group, blastocyst, 5- and 6-day-old embryos, development was 64% compared to 33.8% in the low-protein group. Pregnancy rates were 66.6% compared to 31.9%, and live birth rates were 58.3% compared to 11.3%. The results were even more impressive when patients' carbohydrate intake was also below 40%. In these cases, pregnancy rates were 80%. This research backs up an earlier study which examined whether changing patients' diets between cycles could increase their chances of success. In this study, women with a history of poor blastocyst development and pregnancy outcomes increased their protein intake from 15% of calories to 27% for a period of at least 2 months and then underwent another IVF cycle. Blastocyst formation increased from 18.9% to 45.3%, and pregnancy rates increased from 16.6% to 83%. Eggs, wild fish, organic, and wild meats are all good sources of protein. If consuming this amount of protein is difficult, then you can add a protein supplement. Whey protein isolate from organic, grass-fed, drug-free cattle is a good choice here. Calculating your individual protein requirements is straightforward, but a bit time-consuming. Start by keeping a food diary for a week, noting down the calorie content of everything you eat and drink. It's a bit of a pain, but worth it given the results of the studies. You may have to estimate some things, but there are a lot of websites that list the calorie content of different foods. At the end of the week, add up all the calories consumed and divide the total by 7 to give your average daily calorie intake. To work out your protein requirements, multiply the average daily intake by 0.25. This will give you the suggested lowest level of protein intake each day in calories. To work out the upper limit, multiply the average calorie intake by 0.35. Food labels usually do not list protein quantities in calories. They usually just list the weight. So there is one final step. Divide the lower and upper limits by 4. There are approximately 4 calories per gram of protein. These numbers are the amount of protein in grams that the study suggests you should be aiming for each day. That description is quite involved, so an example may be helpful. The table on the screen shows the number of calories consumed each day for a week. First, add up total calories, which equals 12,358. Then, divide by 7 to give an average daily calorie intake of 1,765. Now multiply by 0.25, which gives a lower limit of 441, and multiply by 0.35, which gives an upper limit of 618. Finally, divide 441 by 4 to give lower limit in grams of 110, and divide 618 by 4 to give upper limit in grams of 155. Using this example, the woman should consume between 110 grams and 155 grams of protein per day. If you don't want to go through this exercise, you could base your protein intake on the recommended daily calorie amounts advised by government health authorities. This would very much be second best, however, as it would not be tailored to your specific needs. As a guide, the US and UK governments estimate that moderately active women need around 2,000 calories per day, which would give a protein range of 125 to 175 grams per day. Tweak 5. Eat organic where possible. Organic produce is generally more expensive than non-organic produce. The issue is whether it is worth spending the extra money. The answer boils down to 2 questions. Are the chemicals used in the production of non-organic produce, such as pesticides, damaging to fertility? And is the nutritional content of organic produce better than non-organic produce? The first point is covered in detail in the toxins section, so I will not repeat it here. On the second point, the answer is that organic and non-organic produce have similar levels of some nutrients, but organic produce has between 18 and 69% more antioxidants. Antioxidants are important to maintain health by preventing damage to our bodies caused by various internal and external things. My wife and I tried to eat organic food as much as possible, but it was difficult to eat 100% organic, or even close to 100%. As a result, we made sure that anything we ate that was not organic came from a good source, and for fruit and vegetables, we made sure they were considered safe by the Environmental Working Group. We'll look at this more in the toxins section. Tweak 6. Consume healthy fats. For years, we have been told that fat is bad for us. This is not true, or at least not completely true. Many fats are good for us and, in fact, are necessary for optimal health. Fats are split into saturated and unsaturated fats are further split into monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. Most foods contain a mixture of different fats. For example, extra virgin olive oil is primarily monounsaturated fat, with a small amount of polyunsaturated fat. Most vegetable oils are high in polyunsaturated fat, whereas animal fats are high in monounsaturated and saturated fats. We need a balance of each for optimal health. Fats have three primary functions in the body: to provide building blocks for cell walls, to provide energy, and to be converted into other substances, such as hormones. Without adequate intake of the right fats, our bodies simply cannot function optimally, so we need to pay close attention to the fats we eat. Some of the best fats to consume are as follows. Extra virgin olive oil. It is first important to note that not all olive oil is created equal. By far the best type is extra virgin olive oil, which means that it has been extracted by mechanical crushing and not through the use of chemicals. It is best used raw in salads and dressings or drizzled over food after cooking. It can be used to cook, but only at low temperatures. Cooking at higher temperatures can damage its structure and change it from being healthy to unhealthy. Avocados. These have been described as the best food to eat for IVF by Professor Jorge Chavarro, a fertility expert at Harvard University. They contain high levels of monounsaturated fats, which have been associated with higher live birth rates. Wild oily fish, wild meat, and grass-fed meat. These have a good balance of fats and are the closest thing we have to the meat we have evolved to eat. Steer clear of grain-fed fish and meat. This includes things like farmed salmon, which is fed an artificial diet that changes its fat profile in a similar way to grain-fed cattle. Any good butcher and fishmonger will know the provenance of their produce, and it would be a good idea to consult with them. Virgin coconut oil. Virgin coconut oil is almost entirely saturated fat, but, to get all scientific, it is a medium-chain triglyceride, which is much more easily absorbed by our bodies than long-chain triglycerides, the typical saturated fat found in Western diets. It has been used for centuries in cultures that have low levels of heart and other disease. One of the key benefits of coconut oil is that it is ideal for cooking at higher temperatures, as it is extremely stable. As with olive oil, not all coconut oil is the same. Look for virgin oil to ensure you are getting a good product. If it is not virgin, it is unhealthy and should be avoided. We saw earlier how refined oils are problematic as they have high amounts of omega-6 fats. It would be wise to avoid these. My wife and I did. The most common are canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, vegetable oil, peanut oil, groundnut oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, grapeseed oil, margarine, and butter substitutes. Tweak 7. Eat the rainbow. If you follow a Mediterranean diet, you will consume lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. It is very easy, however, to get into a rut of eating the same things day in and day out, particularly in winter when choice is limited. It is not always easy to do, but you should aim to eat a variety of different colored fruits and vegetables each day. Different colored produce contains different nutrients, and by eating a variety each day, we will help to ensure we are getting everything we need to function optimally. Tweak 8. Eat your 5 a day. Actually, 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day is the minimum you should be consuming. And if you are not getting 5 a day, you are not following a Mediterranean diet. Study after study shows the health benefits of eating fresh fruit and vegetables. For example, eating 7 or more portions a day has been shown to reduce the risk of dying from any cause by 42%. The reason for this is that for our bodies to function optimally, we need an array of vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, and other micronutrients, some of which are only found in fruit and vegetables. Multivitamin supplements can be very useful, but they simply do not replace fruit and vegetables. If, for whatever reason, you struggle to eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, then a greens powder supplement may be helpful. Greens powders are dehydrated vegetables ground into a powder that can be added to food or simply mixed with water. They do not taste great and they are a poor substitute for eating fresh fruit and vegetables, but they are better than not consuming them at all. My wife used these powders on days when she was traveling and was not able to get her 5 a day. It may be something worth considering, but to repeat, should not be seen as a replacement. Tweak 9. Avoid fruit juices. Fruit juices are not a substitute for eating whole fruits. While they contain many of the vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients, they do not provide the range of nutrients or the level found in whole fruit. One reason for this is that edible skins and pulp are typically removed during the juicing process, and it is in these where many nutrients are found. Removal of the skins and pulp also has other negative effects. It takes away most of the fiber, which means that fruit juice is less filling than an equivalent sized piece of fruit, and results in more of the fruit sugars being stored as fat, because the fiber is not present to slow down absorption. In fact, it has been shown that drinking fruit juice increases the risk of developing diabetes, where eating whole fruit actually lowers the risk. There's also the issue of many fruit juices not being made from 100% fruit and containing unhealthy additives. Fresh, whole fruit, on the other hand, is very helpful to fertility. For example, one study showed that higher fruit intake is associated with getting pregnant more quickly. Tweak 10. Don't eat blackened food. By blackened food, I mean anything that has been burnt, caramelized, or cooked in a way that leads it to become dark or black. Barbecued food is a good example. Researchers have found that women who are struggling to conceive have much higher levels of things called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs for short. AGEs occur naturally in our bodies in small amounts, but can be consumed in large amounts through eating burnt or blackened foods. These AGEs can cause inflammation in the lining of the womb, which makes it more difficult for an embryo to implant and develop. If an embryo cannot implant or develop, then you will not become pregnant. On top of this, AGEs can interfere with the development of the placenta, which can lead to further complications. Tweak 11. Avoid sugary drinks. We talked about sugar in Tweak 2, but it is worth mentioning sugar-sweetened beverages specifically. The effect of these drinks on fertility was shown in a recent study. Researchers found that overall, men and women who drank sugary drinks had fertility rates that were 20% lower than average. The study also suggested that the more of these drinks you consume, the bigger the impact. For example, women who drank at least one sugary drink a day had fertility rates that were 25% lower than average, and men who drank at least one sugary drink a day had fertility rates that were 33% lower than average. Ditch the sugary drinks. If you're not sure if a drink contains sugar, check the label. And if you're still not sure, don't risk it. Tweak 12. Eat nuts. Provided, of course, you are not allergic to them. Nuts are a fantastic source of healthy fats, fiber, protein, and a host of other nutrients. It has been shown that people who eat them regularly have far fewer health problems. they have also been shown to significantly improve sperm quality. The best nuts to choose are raw varieties, with their skin on. Almonds and walnuts were used in the above studies, so these are a good option. While I couldn't find any studies on nuts and female fertility, it has been shown that selenium is important in preventing ovulatory infertility. Brazil nuts are packed full of selenium and are therefore a good choice.